in ce klasım, in ce klasım.
Minister for the education of silence. In Trump is the same. Okay, bye. Yes, yes. I watched the last week, maybe the week before, some argue with some
At the St. John's background. There's really great black. Those dudes are those two. You need code, right? You don't have to come. So let us regroup ourselves for our next round of presentations. It's the red part. Getting old. So. Okay, so welcome for our next round of presentations, and I would like to. That is Ingrid. Oh, there. Okay, Ingrid Pastor from the Catholic University of Sacred Heart in Milan, our partner in this symposium, and she's a Kierkegaard specialist, so you will get some very good understanding of Kierkegaard.
Thank you very much. So, the title of my presentation is Kierkegaard through the communication in the age of faith. So I'm trying to show you how to connect Kierkegaard thought to the problem of fake news in the era of social media. According to several philosophical and political theories, free discussion is at the heart of modern liberal societies. In the emblematic year of 1841, Alphonse de Lamartine described the sovereignty of idea as, I quote, the modern power whose very name was unknown to antiquity, end of quote. He stated that public opinion was really born when Gutenberg, the artificer of a new word invented by printing, the multiplication and indefinite communication of thought and the human reason. This is from his History of Revolution of 848. As a keen observer of the topsy-turvy social relation of his time, I quote from Peter's speaking into the air from the call of this Congress, Kierkegaard was not dazzled by the indefinite potential of the press in order to improve the communication of thoughts. Rather, he was interested in examining the real nature of the phenomenon of public opinion, as it has been pointed out in the very first presentation of this seminar. Something that can be very interesting nowadays, of course. According to Kierkegaard, the public is but an abstraction created by the press itself, namely an abstraction made up of unsubstantial individuals who are never united or never can be united in the simultaneity of any situation of organization, and yet are claimed to be a whole. This was a definition that Kierkegaard gave in 1846 in a literary review, a writing that was actually born as a literary review of Thomasin Gyllenborg's Two Ages novel, but that soon became a cultural critic pamphlet, especially in its third part, called The Present Age, in which Kierkegaard discussed the loss of individuality and the organic community in the irresponsible crowd. If you read this book, you will notice that Kierkegaard's reflections are very penetrating and extremely contemporary, like a kind of prophecy. It was already put in evidence by the first American curator of the book in the 70s. So we can firmly confirm it today. The anonymous unsubstantiality of the public corpse, Kierkegaard used this word, is nowadays, in the age of the inflationary public sphere, hugely emphasized by the phenomenon of social networks, where the distance between senders and the receivers become not only a kind of not existing space in which the concept of truth loses its consistency. So, first of all, what do we exactly mean with the word truth? Just a brief remark about that. We continue to talk about truth, and true and truth, but what does it mean, truth? We used to consider the truth as a correspondence. And this is actually the idea of truth we have in mind when we talk about it in the journalistic context. With the idea of truth as correspondence, I'm referring, of course, to the classical theory of Aristotle in Metaphysics passage 1011b25, where Aristotle said, to say of what is that it is not, or of what it is not that it is false, while to say of what is that it is and of what is not that it is not is true. This is the origin of theory of truth of correspondence, the same in Plato, Cratylus, or in the Sophists. And then I'm referring to its metaphysical version by Thomas Aquinas, according to which truth is the equation of thing and intellect. Veritas est adequatio rei et intellectus. So, according to the truth as correspondence, a judgment is said to be true when it conforms to the external reality, the facts, as we call them. Then, what guarantees that there can be a conformity between things and intellect? I mean, how can intellect grasp reality? Ages of speculation have tried to answer this question. However, we not have time to discuss it now. Let me just say that this is not a problem, that it is at the ground of the fake news problem. So, in a sense, even if we would have found the most solid certainty of the possibility of a correspondence, we would have not faced the problem of fake news. As I already have pointed out in my opening remarks speech yesterday, the epistemological relativism regarding both the possibility of a correspondence between things and intellect and the several interpretation of a single fact. This epistemological relativism is essentially different from what we today are calling fake news or post-truth. In the latter, there is a deliberate and conscious avoidance of known facts. But this is also a problem that is connected with the sources of this news, with the moment of their production. And this is a problem of our age. Many claim indeed that the process of disinformation have already existed in the political struggle. That's right, but actually it is also true that the contemporary fake news are the result of a proper work of communication engineering that is new in comparison to the past. See the problem of the so-called cyber truths or the trolls and the bots and so on. On the other hand, there are real individuals with their own critical capacity. We could discuss what critical capacity means, but we do not have time. We can just say that the ontological level of the single individual is strongly affected by the pressure of the so-called public opinion. We talk nowadays of the so-called fear of missing out syndrome. FOMO is the acronym also of this syndrome. That is a kind of social anxiety whose effects are impressive. Just consider how many times a day we look our smartphone in order to check news, global news, of course, but also simply our little personal world. I think it could be interesting to compare Kierkegaard expression public courts here in Danish, namely the anonymous officials of the social leveling, to the contemporary expression cyber truths, whose force that according to Kierkegaard could be calculated even by a mathematical law. Kierkegaard states, this is a quote, "Leveling is not the action of one individual, but a reflection game in the hand of an abstract power. Just as one computes the diagonal in a parallelogram of forces, so also can the law of leveling be computed for the individual who levels other is himself carried along, and so on. While the individual egoistically thinks he knows what he is doing, it must be said that they all know what they do." And this is a quote Kierkegaard took from the Gospel of Luke. "For just as inspired enthusiastic unanimity results in something more that is not the individuals, as something more emerges here also. A demon that no individuals can control is conjured up, and although the individual selfishly enjoys the extraction during the brief moments of pleasure in the leveling, he is also underwriting his own law. No period, no age, and therefore not the present one either, can halt the skepticism of leveling. For the moment it wants to halt the leveling, it will once again exemplify the law. It can be held only if the individual, in individual separateness, gains the intrepidity of religiousness." End of quote. Now, as you all know, Kierkegaard is a Christian writer. According to the philosopher, there is an essential connection between words as a medium of truth and life. This consubstantiality of word, life, truth has a religious root in Kierkegaard. He talks about the truth in terms of living word of God. See, of course, at the beginning of the prologue to the Gospel of St. John. In this sense, this is Kierkegaard's quotation, living word is a manifestation of existence. And the important point to emphasize here is the term living. The truth is necessarily living, something living only within the single individual. True is subjectivity, and subjectivity is true is probably the most famous Kierkegaard statement, and of course it has nothing to do with the Protagorean relativism. Yet, beside the strictly theological meaning of Kierkegaard's view, I think that his reflection on the connection between word and truth, his effort to recall the separability of truth and the real living subjectivity in opposition to the anonymity of the public, the ethical philosophical meaning of his concept of seriousness, alvor, in Danish, opposed to the present age, which is essentially a sensible, reflecting age, devoid of passion, flaring up in superficial, short-lived enthusiasm and prudentially relaxing in ignorance, could still nowadays show the possibility of a fruitful approach to the act of communicating. Maybe the most meaningful contribution that Kierkegaard could give to our discussion today deals with the theme of the singularity in opposition to the leveled public. As he states, morality, has been already quoted the first day yesterday, morality, we can read morality as seriousness, actually, is character, singularity. Character is something engraved, Kierkegaard wrote, from the Greek karasso, I engrave. So I think that to morality as a seriousness, only education can be the right way. Thank you.
What we'll do is the follow-up paper is also same theme,
Yes.
and then after this through, we'll have a little discussion. Okay. My colleague, friend here, Paul Grillenhammer.
Yeah, it is a follow-up paper. So, the topic of silence is the issue of being like a profound witness to a contradiction. And I'll be just looking at that in Kierkegaard and Heidegger, perhaps explore more in Heidegger the parallels with Kierkegaard, and take Heidegger in the direction of the witness to the profound dilemma we face that leaves you in silence. Again, the problem with, of course, silence is it offers no solution, but it's the beginning point to a solution. And unless one is the witness, there's no solution. Obviously, many people have mentioned the stages on life's way of Kierkegaard, aesthetic, ethical, faith. In the text itself, stages on life's way. The stage of the aesthetic is in vino veritas. That's the title of it. And so you get the idea that the person involved is having a good time, but there's no sense of self, as Kierkegaard says elsewhere. They're fleeing something. They're in dread of being a self. So something is distracting them. It's making them to live this life that seems to be involved with pleasure and fun, but it's actually suffering in some deep way. So there's a call. Heidegger uses the call too, as we'll see, but there's a calling, there's some type of dimension that's letting people know that this is not enough. So there's a presence somewhere. This drives into the ethical, right? That is to find a self, to be a person, rather than disperse in just the anonymity of enjoyment. To become a self means to make a commitment, and this leads into, obviously, the ethical phase. In Stages on Life's Way, he talks about commitment of marriage. And the commitment of marriage, of course, can be loving, right? But, in tension with the aesthetic domain, we have a commitment that becomes a sacrifice, right? Anybody who's married, well, anyway, I won't go into this, but anyway, there is a sacrifice that dwells up there that becomes a suffering. So the suffering doesn't disappear; it manifests itself differently. But the person through the commitment has an identity, because now they're leading towards the future with a goal. So it gathers themselves, but there's still a deep unfulfillment here, because at some level there's a loss of substance. What is that loss of substance? In terms of the ethical, he'll also refer to it as the night of infinite resignation. Again, you're giving up something, you're lost, you're empty. I'm not sure that King Agamemnon is an exact representation of the ethical, but he calls it the tragic hero in Fear and Trembling. And Agamemnon has to make the decision whether or not to sacrifice his daughter or sacrifice his country, because the god gives him a choice. But the god is capricious, so it's up to Agamemnon to make the choice. He won't be punished either way, it's up to him. And he decides to make the resignation to give up family for country, and he sacrifices his daughter. And they have a successful trip to Troy. And there's obviously all sorts of moral issues to mention there, but again, he uses this Kierkegaard as an example to try and show the type of sacrifice that being a good citizen, a committed member of society might make. And again, the point is that there's something missing, something empty. In terms of faith, obviously Abraham is the example that he uses, the knight of faith. And of course, there's the teleological suspension of the ethical, which creates this bizarre mental paradox for anybody who tries to understand the story. And it's frightening because, again, in the Christian tradition, God is not capricious, God is good, God is loving. It's not like the Greek gods. And yet here we have the all-loving God telling Abraham to do an unethical thing. And he has to follow the command. So all of a sudden ethics just disappears and the individual stands up in a one-to-one relationship with the divine. And this is the issue for Kierkegaard. What is this one-to-one relationship with the absolute? So it's not the ethical he uses the word the absolute. So what is this connection between the individual one-to-one with the absolute? So that's the challenge to understand. But again, it's frightening. It's a horrifying idea. I mean, put into contemporary context, to think about people who act in the name of God on a one-to-one level, transcending the ethical, it is a frightening contemporary idea. But somehow in this dimension, right, this is where some kind of deep fulfillment comes from. But fulfillment for Kierkegaard doesn't mean happiness, right? It means connection. It means somehow being pulled into something that's greater than you. It's there, and he calls it an objective uncertainty. Analogous, not the same as Socrates. Socrates would try to be the gadfly and try to get people to recognize that everything you think you know isn't really true because you think you know what you're doing. And he just tries to get people to realize that the greatest things in your life, the most meaningful things in your life, you can't define. Justice, happiness, virtue. And that's the whole point of the Socratic dialogues, the early ones anyway, is to get people to realize that the things that matter most, the fundamental cores of your life, that drive you on like a magnetic force, you can't define, and yet they're there. So there's like what Kierkegaard says, an objective uncertainty. Find that, and this is what can sustain you. Now, different between Socrates and Kierkegaard, Socrates was childlike, happy unto his death. Nietzsche says, what a monster, because it's unbelievable. What kind of fiction is this? And so we have Kierkegaard who recognizes that what we have here is a tremendous tension. And again, put within the present age, it's a tension precisely between societal values and divine values, right? They don't sit comfortably together. And again, the existential situation for him is precisely a situation that's unsolvable, right? That's the existential dread, because there's this disconnect between the world of secular and the world of the divine. They just don't seem to go together. So existentialism has often gotten the label as gray, depressing, and perhaps it is. But again, it's trying to draw something that people have to find within their lives. So there might be something hopeful. Now, Heidegger in Being and Time, again, is clearly, maybe he should be accused of plagiarism. I don't know, because there's so many elements almost the whole structure of part one seems to follow certain lines of Kierkegaard's thinking. Anyway, but similar to the talk just before in other talks about Kierkegaard, Heidegger talks about the public. He calls it how he exists as a they self. And it's a very thin sense of identity. In fact, it's a non-identity. I'm like everyone else. There is no identity. I'm lost. And he uses three phenomena. In fact, Heidegger likes trilogies when he studies phenomena. He's always got threes on threes. Idle chatter, curiosity, and ambiguity. Idle chatter, of course, is just, it's like being on a wave, and you just talk about things that are flowing. And again, in terms of social media, though Heidegger doesn't mention it, I'm often struck by the incredible violence of social media and how everybody's angry at each other. They're all taking it out on each other. And yet it's like this a level where there's no responsibility for anything anybody says. And that's part of Heidegger's idea here, is that part of the public, the they self, is there's no sense of responsibility for taking ownership of things. Curiosity is the related thing where nothing holds your attention. You're floating in and out of subjects, pretending as if you know what you're saying. Everybody's talking as if things are so serious, which they are, but nobody really has a grasp of what it is they're saying. Ambiguity is that form of life that is avoiding. Again, avoiding. Similar to Kierkegaard, it's an avoidance. But avoidance of what? So Heidegger makes, it seems, a change in focus from Kierkegaard, where what we're hiding from is a sense of my own mortality. And he switches the tone to a kind of lonely end. That is, we're all hiding from the mortal fact that we're a being unto death. Death, he says, is non-relational. We don't understand it. It's the great paradox. We know we're all leading towards it, but nobody understands what it could possibly be. Heidegger, in Being and Time, shows no religious sentiment about hopefulness, about an afterlife, no sense of the divine, right? That seems to be cut out. And it's precisely this kind of dread of the end of not being that people are hiding from. And that's why they get involved with all this busyness to kind of create a false immortality. Right? But everybody knows that you're dying, at least at some age in your life. It really strikes you and it affects you, and you start doing weird things. Anyway, so to break out of that level of idle chatter, curiosity, and ambiguity, he talks about anxiety. An anxiety that we're hiding from all the time, and it keeps popping up. Any moment, it could happen at any moment, right? We don't reckon with it, we don't deal with it, but sometimes it flashes on us, and we have, out of our own willpower, a reckoning. And again, it's the Augenblick, he calls it, the moment of vision. And again, related to this useless, senseless life, it's really just a matter of what meaning can I interject into the world, into my life, before I die. So we have this element of passion that Kierkegaard's concerned with and what Heidegger's concerned with. And at some level here, it seems like Heidegger's talking about me making my own way. And some people try to read Kierkegaard like that. And it doesn't seem that that's Kierkegaard at all. It seems like one needs to open oneself up to the divine in order to find the way. And so people read Heidegger as the secular side of a sort of Kierkegaard, but I don't think that's true either. So obviously, in response to death and the meaningless life, one can get involved. One can focus. So one of the problems of the public is it's not focused. Ambiguity runs their life. So obviously, through a commitment analogous to the ethical level of Kierkegaard, one can get involved. And this is where Heidegger's sense of the revelation of truth can come from. And again, I look at this very practically. You know, if you get busy and commit your time to something, it's a commitment of your life. It's a serious commitment. That means you can't do other things. But as you become an expert in a field, you start to find your way in the world, and meaning starts to reveal itself, some type of depth meaning versus surface meaning, right? And socially, you then become whatever science you choose, human sciences, carpentry, whatever it is, once you devote your time and your life to it, you take it seriously, it's a commitment, and you become skilled at it, you become a functioning member of society. So there's that ethical dimension in Heidegger that's similar to the Kierkegaard, right? And there's something good there, right? I mean, whatever it is, he doesn't tell you what you need to choose, but choose something and do it well is sort of the implication. But nonetheless, there's still something that the death analysis still arises. And this happens when people call Heidegger's turn into his later philosophy, but I see it as just sort of a movement. It's not radically different. And this comes up when he realizes that, you know, we're not all living different worlds. In fact, we're living in a world that is got a particular mood to it, right? So you talk about the world of the carpenter being very different from the world of the scientist, and the world of the philosopher being very different from the world of the theologian. But the point is that Heidegger starts to realize that there aren't all these different realities. There aren't all these different perspectives. That it's all subtended by something fundamental. And that's what he calls the technological being. And the technological being is the greatest threat to humanity itself because it's snuffing out what Kierkegaard would call the absolute. But Heidegger in the post-Nietzschean world doesn't refer to a Christian loving God. In fact, he's part of the death of God tradition, but he still realizes that in this technological world, the absolute, the sacred, the holy is lost. And yet the sacred and the holy, the absolute, is somehow still with us. And technological being is snuffing it out because we're so busy creating things, consuming things, watching things, busy typing things, that we're not paying attention to what he calls the being of being. And again, the great mystery in Heidegger is what is the being of being? He spent his whole life trying to articulate the being of being. But the being of being, whatever it is for Heidegger, is the absolute. And again, all of our distracted life, our technological being is distracting us from it. Now, one way into trying to understand it is a kind of environmental, ecological way. Many people have realized that whatever Heidegger's trying to do with his critique of technology is moving in an environmental, ecological way. So he does talk in the lecture on technology about the difference between techne, right, as a human creation, and natural poiesis as a creative process that goes into techne too. When you create a tool, that's poiesis, creativity. But there's poiesis going on all around us that isn't human-made. And that's, again, the fecund nature of existence, life. And again, it can't just be life like a plant or a dog. It's the way that every element that we know of somehow is contributing to the life that we have. Oxygen and water, obviously, are sustaining life. They're part of life. They're part of poiesis. So again, this is where he starts to talk about saying that there's a deeper, more profound, mysterious kind of poiesis than what human beings can do. And he draws attention back to, again, life, ecology, the ecosystem. And again, the thing there is when one tries to conceptualize the source of everything, you can't do it. And yet it's there. It's the background. It's what makes everything possible. As Anaximander said so long ago, it's that out of which all things come and to which things go. Anaximander had a very ruthless view that Schopenhauer took up, that it's an injustice to pop up out of the collaperon and you're pulled back out of the injustice of living. Heidegger's not quite like that. He has a little bit more of a sensible view of trying to honor it, respect it, even though it can be horrible, right? It's like the Kantian sublime between the beautiful, right? Kant was very sensitive to the ways in which our relationship to nature can be both beautiful and horribly sublime. But again, the point that Heidegger's trying to bring up is the only thing that can save us from whatever destitution we're facing. And again, the destitution he's looking at is simple things that we see all around us, is factory farming, being lost within technologies into virtual worlds, the way that virtual worlds alter our sense of reality. And he's, Albert Borgman, I think, later calls it hyper-reality. And again, the only hope is to recognize that there's something devastating happening. So the death analysis now comes back in, not in terms of my own death, but catastrophic destruction itself, to the awareness of what ultimately matters, the absolute. Heidegger doesn't offer any solutions. In fact, there's a pessimistic side to him, as he says, well, only a God can save us now. And again, he kind of throws up his arms in a certain way in an interview late in his life. So there's something similar here because, again, some suggestions, if to make Heidegger's view practical, would be radical revision of the way we do business, a radical slowing down. And he talks about the peace of dwelling. And here I think of Epicurus, the Hellenistic philosopher who advocated getting the hell out of normal society and starting your own garden, right? But again, that's very impractical, right? Completely impractical. And yet that's, again, the existential dilemma. We're facing something that's catastrophic. And now with the global climate change and all the floating cities of garbage and mass species extinction, again, we're facing something catastrophic. And yet business goes on as usual, right? People talk, people propose, maybe in 10 years we can pull back, and again, there's something devastating and horrifying on the horizon. So again, Heidegger just gives voice to the paradox between having to open yourself up to the absolute, and yet being devastated by the fact that what can we do to change? And again, that's parallel to Kierkegaard's dilemma with the absolute and the way that society is. Again, it's just a kind of witness. And again, so the issue of silence comes in precisely those moments in the tension and the paradox of just recognizing the disaster. But again, what's the solution? They don't have one. Well, last thing I'll say, somebody asked me this in class once, and I said, I'm just a philosopher. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, please ask questions for both.
I noticed that there is a quote the Kierkegaard expression that is objective uncertainty.
Yeah, I like it.
Me too. And I'm not wrong, it's from the postscript. And if in the situation of objective uncertainty, we can talk about the objective uncertainty. I think that Kierkegaard is ironical in using this expression, which can be the criterion of choice.
Excuse me, can you talk louder, please? A little bit louder.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I know you are just a philosopher, but in Kierkegaard's view, what do you think in a situation of objective uncertainty? Just consider that the expression is ironical because it cannot exist an objective uncertainty, of course, but which would be the criterion for a choice?
Well, again, what could be the criterion of a choice? Again, this is precisely where rationalistic philosophy breaks down, and this is where it becomes intuitive philosophy to a certain degree, the kind of the way Schopenhauer talked about philosophy has to be intuitive, artistic. And again, that's not satisfying to rationalist analytic philosophers. Like, you didn't just help me there. And again, so the criteria can only be the witnessing of the magnetic powers that are there. And again, that sounds mystical, but again, I don't think so. If you do a little Socratic technique and say, why do you get mad at somebody in the road when they cut you off? Because they almost hurt me. That was hurt. Why does that matter? And again, if you keep asking the question, you're going to come to this issue of, well, it's not just. Not just. So we all care about justice. There it is, you know? And again, but what's justice? And then you try to give it definition. I'm not really sure. That doesn't quite work. That's too narrow and that's too broad. But again, just trying to show that the phenomena is present, that would be an attempt of a criterion of a phenomenological type to try to show that it's present.
Or for the question about Kierkegaard, defined himself as an unhappy lover of God, and I have to confess that I'm an unhappy lover of rationalism.
Oh, no.
So in a previous discussion, we talked about two sexes and how women are second to men in a very dominant society. My question to this article right here is the fact that society has created a foundation where there are inequalities, where there are, structures where, say, I want to go and I want to help the world, but you can't do that without being in a corporation, like obviously said in our previous class. You have to be at the top or, work for a corporation that you might not necessarily agree with in order to make change. So, what is your advice to, the ordinary person where it's like, I want to do well, like I want to, make a change, but yet I kind of have to like sell a part of myself. That's where like the tension comes in, where it's like I have to really give up a part of my identity in order to do that.
Well, again, obviously Heidegger would certainly say that we can't magically change things. You have to work from out of the technological being that we are. He doesn't advocate anything like Epicurus going back to the garden, because that's a cheap way out. that works with me. That doesn't help the issue. So obviously you got to work with what you can. Again, I think what matters is that that the people who are involved with what it is you're doing has the right, again, to put it simply, right motivation. So I don't see that the structures are necessarily evil. Again, they're distracting. So if one could use the structures in a way that matters, and again, that's certainly just theoretically possible. Again, one of the dangers of corporate life is, again, the violence and the hierarchy, right? So again, there's something vicious about getting involved with any organization where the organization becomes more important than the purpose. You gotta watch out for that, right?
Sorry, I have a follow-up as well. So in terms of, like you said before, becoming a farmer, in this day and age, it's very hard to even imagine a life where you can totally do that. Like, it's not sustainable for that person to move in or interact in society. So how would you combat that?
Well, I don't know. Again, these are the dilemmas. So Heidegger, like I said, like a philosopher, just lays out a grand problem. And again, it's up to urban planners to try and figure out solutions, because there is a problem. The deniers of a problem, again, I won't name one in this, who I'm thinking of, but the deniers of the problem are more of the problem than anything. And so again, the witnessing, right? That moment, what he calls the Augenblick early on, the witnessing of the problem it's sort of the source of the spiritual attempt to change. That's all. And again, I think that's, if you don't have the witnessing, you got nothing.
Just a couple of points. The first is, I think that part of what unites Kierkegaard and Heidegger is that neither believes that there is an opposition between the public and the single individual. And that's one of the great problems, I think, with most readings of Kierkegaard and Heidegger. In Heidegger, we see that average everydayness is the opportunity structure for authentic existence. It's not in opposition to, it's the condition of possibility. And the same with Kierkegaard. Even in the 2 Ages, we hear him talking a lot about the public is a rigorous examination through which the individual must pass, either being religiously educated or destroyed. So they're not in opposition. And I think the secret and the great path forward in both of their cases is to figure out what it means to pass through without being destroyed by the public. That's the first one. And then the second thing about this objective uncertainty, I think Kierkegaard is great. And the Night of Faith can bring us quite close to that moment of decision, that leap that comes out of objective uncertainty. But honestly, my money is with somebody more recent, Alain Badiou, who actually uses Kierkegaard to talk about something he says, fidelity to the event. And there's an element of witnessing to what Badiou is up to as well. This idea of fidelity to an event seems to be central to what Kierkegaard was doing, but beyond what Kierkegaard was able to articulate. But Badiou's stuff, I think, takes us to the next level and answers that question Ingrid, that you had about what to do, how to make a decision when faced with an objective uncertainty. Badiou spends his life answering that question.
We can also compare the position and say that before it's said that there is an opposition between public and single individual, but not between single individual and whole population.
People.
I had a question, but your comment provoked a better question. So,
Let's
get on there. You're talking about this return to the land, and I something always strikes me as fascinating in that I observe that the very nature of our discourse, our interaction, must be cast into a different light if we consider a couple things. And one of them is that the fastest growing religious group in the US, one of the fastest percent, is actually the Amish, who are decidedly anti-technology and live a very happy life on the land in a contemporary society.
Happy, you gotta put it.
I
don't know what happiness is.
The point is,
Very, very quick interjection.
Please.
They're also very rich.
yes,
Yeah.
this is the other thing that
That's
but the reason that that's drawn to my attention is that as little as I take trains very frequently across the US, I constantly talk to the Amish on the trains. And you discover there's a massive, massive American subculture that is decidedly anti-technology and doesn't mind it at all. And they survive just fine in our technology-rich world.
Oh, and just to add on to that, Heidegger has a word, Gelassenheit.
Yeah.
It comes from Meister Eckhart, but the Amish use the word too. And again, it's releasement. They're not totally anti-technology, but they want to have a reasoned approach on if they want to adopt it. They try to think about it, these types of things. So Gelassenheit is a word that comes in their tradition, and Heidegger uses it.
Which, by the way, would be an amazing class to offer.
Gelassenheit.
Yes, no, all kidding aside, because it's very much in the spirit of this critical image literacy, having a class that looks at their model
Oh, I see what you're saying.
of reflection on technology would be absolutely fascinating because it's a very, very unique.
It's very different than our model, which
And
is
it's-
produce.
It's a very powerful perspective on the price that we pay in using technology in the context of society itself. I think it'd be a fantastic course offer and very original.
Well, just to piggyback off of that, I grew up in Pennsylvania a little bit, so kind of the heart on the eastern seaboard of the Amish country. And there was a farmer's market, and I would talk to them sometimes. I almost found that because they didn't have technology, I almost felt like they observed, like they were kind of like observing everyone else. Like they were observing, how people interacted with this and that, and they didn't have the technology, so they were kind of looking at everything, and I almost felt like they were kind of smarter than we are a little, to an extent, because, you know, I feel like as a modern society, we put so much emphasis on knowing technology, knowing how it works, knowing how to fix it, you know. I mean, my grandma comes to me all the time being like, how do I copy and paste something? And to me, that sounds so simple, but to her, this is like a whole new thing. And so, you know, we have so much emphasis on that I wonder if we broke away from it and kind of more looked at, is this technology actually benefiting us, or is it just producing it for the sake of producing it, that we might actually evolve a little bit more and be better than just producing right away.
Guys, say one more. This is just a funny comment responding to your experience of having lived in Pennsylvania. I've lived both in South Central Pennsylvania, Lancaster County, as well as the Lower East Side of New York. When I lived in Lancaster County, I had Amish neighbors who called me on the phone to drive them places if their horse was lame or they couldn't get there. So I would pick them up and drive them. On the Lower East Side, if some of my Orthodox neighbors didn't get home before sundown, I had to open the door for them. So they would call me to come and open the door. So the Lower East Side had its Shabbos boys, and the Amish had their drivers.
I'd like to know off of what folks said and your comment about how we're kind of buying into technology and always looking to produce and create. I'm also thinking about the fact that she made a comment about them being smarter than us. And in a way, it makes sense because we're kind of producing technology to do the job for us. Therefore, we don't have to think about certain things. Therefore, we don't have to do certain things. So I think that's a really good point.
Yes, please. So something that I see as uniting the two papers and some of the elements of this conversation is this emphasis on becoming a certain sort of person, becoming a serious person, becoming someone who isn't distracted by the technology, isn't busy, etc. And I think that that's maybe a striking contrast to some of these sort of technological solutions. You know, if we can only identify the news that deals with complexities adequately, the big example that news that doesn't. I used to suggesting that the solution to fake news isn't some other technology, but is instead becoming a certain kind of person.
Yeah, again, I have very little to say about how to fix the news media, but I mean, I'll make a commentary in terms of, I watch CNN and talks about the humanitarian crisis around the world. They're just talking about Donald Trump's tweets. Who cares about Donald Trump's tweets? You know, these are ridiculous. So why keep reporting on them? Just do the right thing and go to the news that matters. Be the witness to the things that are fundamental. I don't understand. That would be the one thing I'd be like, what are you people doing? You know, in terms of news. That would require being type of corporate agent over CNN.
One thing I definitely noticed in the news the past couple of weeks, it's been, you know, a horrible time for California, to say the least, was first you had the borderline shooting and then you had the unfortunate wildfires. But what I noticed the most when it came to the wildfires was that they were focusing on the celebrities who lost their, you know, homes, like Gerard Butler, Miley Cyrus. And I'm sitting there like, yes, it's unfortunate. I understand they lost their homes. It's very unfortunate. But these are celebrities that have multiple homes. They have money, you know, to rebuild these homes. They were able to get their animals out. You're not looking at the other people who have lived on this land for, sometimes they were farms that have been passed down for multiple generations. And they're not focusing on those stories. And we're not donating to those people. We're donating, you know, somewhere else or somewhere here. So it's almost like no one cares about like the normal man anymore. And I think that's unfortunately where Trump gains most of his power in calling CNN fake news and this and that, is because he's showing people, hey, look, CNN's only reporting on Miley Cyrus losing her home. They don't give a crap about, you know, Farmer Joe who lost his home after farming on that land for almost 30 years. So I think that's where news has kind of gone away from what it's supposed to do. It's not connecting ordinary people anymore. It's connecting more on a celebrity level.
Good. Fortunately, good things have come to an end. And now they're making a small shift from
I'm just a philosopher to technology and how technology probably can respond to the existential questions.
Great. Hi, I'm Nikhil. I'm an assistant professor in computer science, and I'm a technologist. So what I will be talking about is technology. So we'll be talking about patterns and perspectives for creating, as well as detecting fake news using artificial intelligence. So I'll just give you an introduction, helicopter view of the different terms we sort of throw around a lot these days. You hear a lot about AI, you hear about machine learning, data mining, so what sets one apart from the other? And then what's the process like? So say I'm a malicious human being and I want to create fake news. How do I go about doing that? Turns out there's already technology out there which allows you to do this in a few hours, right? I'll give you a demo. We're going to crash the CNN website today. So the demo is going to be us looking at how you can generate fake news and then use an external tool like what I'll be using as a tool called Machine Box to detect whether this news is actually detected as fake or not. And what are the challenges? There's a lot of interdisciplinary collaboration going on, benefits, how these tools are written. So that's going to be the topic. So the closest I came to fake news is a few years back. So I was tasked with building a search engine for health records. And if you do a Google search on, say, a certain health condition, the first few terms that show up are usually garbage. Right? It's usually advertisements. If you don't have ad block enabled, they're advertisements, people trying to sell you stuff. Right? So what I did previously was build a search engine which gets information only from credible sources. So even in fake news, how are you actually accessing this news? Is it something that you're using a search engine to search for, or is it something that's just being thrown in your face through social media, right? So what are the modes of access? If you access a credible source for information every morning, go to your news app, you're most likely going to get the right information, right? But if you rely on WhatsApp messages, stuff like that, that's really not the way to go. So the idea behind the search engine is, or any such tool, is you first have to define what credible news is, right? What is real news? And if you can define that and you have that like a corpus of resources that you can use to define real news, then you can use that as a benchmark and check all other news in comparison with that and say, well, this is not that real, right? Just moving on. the first few things I want to talk about is, well, what are these terms you hear about in the media these days? You hear about data mining, you hear about machine learning and artificial intelligence. What are these terms? So data mining is the cornerstone of everything, right? It's pretty much you looking at data and trying to get patterns, which you can use for AI and machine learning. So the basis for both artificial intelligence and machine learning is data mining, right? You have to start with data, and you have to start by looking at data. And artificial intelligence is a broader term then, which means, well, we're not giving a solution, right, to a problem, but we're giving a computer or machine enough data to try and navigate and try to form a solution out of a set of possible candidates, right? That's what artificial intelligence is. And machine learning is completely different, right? There's intersection between all of them, but in machine learning, you offer a problem, a completely new set of data. So think of the Mars rover going to Mars, right? The rover doesn't know what exists on Mars or not. It has a reference point to what exists on Earth. So if it's searching for water, it knows what the chemical composition of water is, right? So it can make it best. It starts with a clean slate, and it can try to learn itself what is on Mars. That's machine learning. So be careful about these stories you buy into, right? Because they could become your reality. I was reading somewhere that by 2022, there'll be more fake news out there than real news, right? So in developed countries, this is going to be a real problem. And if people buy into that, like you all have been saying, the lines between fake and real is going to get really blurred. So I'm going to look at two perspectives for creating fake news, right? One is you can create multimedia content, so doctoring videos, doctoring photographs, and the other is you can create textual misinformation, right? And this problem can be compounded if you take this information created by these platforms, I think I'll talk about it in a bit, and just share it on social media. And the problem gets worse if the post becomes viral. So if that post becomes viral, it becomes real, right? It becomes really, well, this is now, fake news is now becoming real news because people are buying into it. So there needs to be some sort of mechanism, and you asked me some questions about the dynamic nature of information. There needs to be some mechanism where in real time, if we can sort of have a really credible database of all these resources and have them updated, right? And then run these models which predict whether news is fake or not. That would be an ideal case scenario, right? But we haven't hit that infrastructure yet. So coming back, I realized I could have answered your question a little better. If you change the dates on a news article, if that news article has been seen before and it's part of your corpus, the machine learning or the artificial intelligence model would tell you that, oh, well, what we saw was from a credible news source, say CNN.com, and what we're seeing now is from someone else, and the dates are mismatched, right? So that's one way. But again, that has to be in real time, right? You can't do that. Like you can't assume that one model is going to work for all. Right? So these sort of algorithms for generating fake news, right? There are two broad classes. There's a generative algorithm and discriminative algorithm. So discriminative is if you're given a set of features, you're trying to predict what the final class is. So given an email message from the Prince of Nigeria, if the amount changes, right, every second message, since the context is, well, the mail's coming to you from a certain address, you can classify that as spam. It has a certain number of text items. It has a prize term in it that you're going to win. You can say, well, let's discriminate that to be spam. And then you have another set of algorithms, which are the generative algorithms, which are algorithms which can take certain features or take certain classifiers. So look at what constitutes a spam message or a non-spam message, and then generate all the features that can lead up to that conclusion of a message being a spam email message or non-spam email message. So if we're to tackle this problem from a technological perspective, these two algorithms need to work together. And there needs to be some sort of a feedback loop between discriminative and the generative algorithms. And ideally, this would be great if it happened in real time, right? But the technology we have so far. So I was playing around with there's a library out there, a software library. It's called FaceSwap. It was developed by an independent developer, and it uses a technology called deepfakes. So anyone can just look at YouTube videos, right? And this tool can digest YouTube videos, do facial recognition, and change the faces of celebrities, right? And I was able to do this last night in like 2-3 hours. So you can just take this, and it's just a few lines of code. It's about 10-15 lines of code. You specify the URL of the video. You specify the URL of the video you want to replace that video in terms of the face, and it just swaps the face on. So it's really easy now for even high school students to just sit down and be able to generate their own content, right? So how do we go about trying to circumvent this, right? And we can't do this if we don't understand how this fake news is created, right? So that's the first step. And what's being used now quite a lot is GANs, generative adversarial networks. So remember I said you need to have some sort of a feedback loop. So you have a block there called the discriminator network, which just looks at real world data, right? Where is this real world data obtained from? Well, experts like yourself, right, who say, well, oh, this is real data, this is not real data. But again, this is a predefined database, right? And then there's a generator network, which can add noise either to existing real data or it can generate its own data, right? And so currently these networks are being used to generate false images. So what I showed you before of Jimmy Fallon's face being replaced by, what his name is, Norton, Edward Norton, that's generated using a GAN network. And in the end, you have predicted labels, right? Is this image fake or not? Is it true or not, right? So that feedback loop needs to be realized. There's still a lot of research being carried out on how you can do this in real time. This network or this algorithm was only proposed 3 years back, so people are trying to figure out how to work about doing this in real time. But the basic thing is technologists can't work on their own, right? So we need to have some way for people like yourself to validate what is fake news or not, right? And then we can build models around that to try and better identify fake news and not fake news. Again, there's no 100% guarantee that everything will be detected as real or fake, right? There's bound to be things that stick. There's bound to be fake news that is going to stick, is going to slide through the cracks. But if you can get at least 80, 85%, 90% of those stories out of circulation early on, that is a big thing. So humans needed, domain experts like yourself, to tag information, to tag news stories as either being fake or not. And once we have this database of all these fake news stories, we can build a better understanding of what really fake news looks like. To detect fake textual content, Neil talked about it a bit, using NLP to understand what real content in real news stories look like. So there have been attempts at trying to focus too much on what constitutes fake news, and those sort of studies haven't delivered that much accuracy. So the way to go about it is identify what constitutes real news. Once you know what real news is from credible sources, you can always look at the deltas or the differences between the fake and the real news. So I'm just gonna show you a quick video demo that I did on my laptop yesterday. So there's an open source tool out there called Machinebox. So I can get this to run. Oh. Okay. So what I did was I used this website. If you do a search for fake news generator, this is one of the first sites that shows up. You can either generate news items automatically here, or you can write your own news items, right? And once you write your own news item, if you see on that image there, there's actually a fake news site. It's called cbs-news.us. And once you generate this news story, I'll just show you how it works. So say I indulged a little here. I said, Professor Kierkegaard wins Nobel Prize in acting. And the description of the story is: the world rejoiced today as Professor Kierkegaard of St. John's University won the Nobel Prize for Best Acting. It's a total nonsense story, and I just added something else. A national holiday was declared on all beach resorts because of this. So that's the fake news story, right? Once you have that, you can search Flickr for graphic, so you can search for, say, the Nobel Prize image. So that's what I did there. I searched Flickr for graphic, which could superimpose on the story, called it Nobel Prize. And I just added this. That looks somewhat like it, right? So generate the link, and you have a link for a news story, right? And you can sort of share this now on social media platforms. So, and the interesting thing here is the domain names, CBS News. I can have one for CNN. Someone who's not really looking much into the details would think that's actually come from CBS or CNN, right? And now there's this tool, it's called Fakebox. So what they've done, I can pause this, is they've used AI techniques. They look at the header or the title of the story, they look at the content of the story, and then they can tell you what's the score for the article. So if it's a high score, there's a high likelihood of the story being real. If it's low, there's a high likelihood of it being and they classify all websites as being either satire, opinions, or true stories. So satire and opinions don't get a high score. So like news sites like The Onion, if that's where you go to for your news, that is a satire website. So you just type in the title, you type in the content of the news story, and you analyze, and what you see there, right? So this again is a very limited data set. This is one person sitting down, getting thousands of credible websites together, training their data mining model for real news using those websites, right? It's just one person who's done this. So if you see, it breaks down the content, what's in the text box, into keywords. It breaks down the entities which are being referred to in the news story, and there's an algorithm that computes the score. So if you look there, the title seems fine. The decision there is impartial, right? The title's fine. It's got a high score. It's 89%. But the content seems biased. It's got a low score, so it's got a 23% score of being probability of being real. So there are tools out there, but these are all, so far, they're like singular efforts, right? It's not like a collaborative effort where you can tell me, oh, why don't you just post, I saw these websites and I'm calling you from so-and-so university, this is fake. So if you have some sort of a portal that allows you to do that, it'll become very easy. The real-time problem will still be there, but if there's an active community engagement in flagging these sites, then it becomes easy. Oh, there's another site, so you can even feed in the URL for a particular news story. And this tool will tell you whether it's biased or not. So I have a story here. So Supercuts an offering to give customers balance for $15. So I found it was a story on the Onion. I took that, pasted it, and the tool analyzes it as well. So the title seems fine, but the content, again, it's unsure. So imagine how tools like this would work if that content just became overwhelming. Just feed in as much data as you can to something like this. They claim that this determines fake news stories with an accuracy of 95%, but I'll take that with a pinch of salt because they have very limited data. I mean, the guy who developed this is saying you spent nights going through thousands of websites. That's not enough, right? There are millions of websites out there, millions of stories out there. So pretty much, human intelligence is still the key to building these models, right? So you need to have people who can look at these stories and say, this is fake, this is not fake. And there is a need for human intervention. So one needs to understand how this fake news is created, how it is detected. People need to tag information, and there needs to be that centralized, some sort of a centralized repository, which people know that if it's being validated by this repository as being real, it is real. That is completely missing. So the challenge then is, how do you build synergies across disciplines, right? How do we, as technologists, help people who want to detect fake news? And the first step would be to create some sort of a centralized repository, using people like the guys who develop fake box and just create something huge, which can just look at any news article and work out models that determine with accuracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm scared. Let me be a philosopher. And now I invite our colleague here, who is from the University of Naples, Federico II, Simonetta Primaria.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you, Professor Basile, for inviting me. So, as we say, I am Simonetta Primario, and today I am talking about a particular phenomenon of a particular group dynamics that is able to create a context in which people are more likely to believe in fake news and to generate misinformation. So, let me start with a story. This painting is a beautiful painting, and it is called The Donation of Room. It is located in the Vatican and in the Hall of Constantine. The painting depicts an historical event. As you can see, there's the, in this way, in the middle of the park, there's the Emperor Constantine kneels before the Pope Sylvester I and offered the Pope and his successors the total control of the city of Rome and also the entire Western Roman Empire. So the stories say that the Pope commissioned this work to celebrate the juridical act that which the emperor gave the power to the church, the first temporal power to the church. So only the research work made by Lorenzo Valla, a great philologist, showed that this document was a fake, because it is commissioned more several centuries later, in the Middle Age. So the Valla did what we now call it the debunking or demystification, discover and let people know that the story is a fake. So I'm sure that this is not the first fake news of the history, but probably is the most diffused or one of the largest, but not the first. So fake news have always existed, even before the internet and even before the invention of printing press. And sometimes their diffusion is used to the preservation of the power through the manipulation of the public opinion. So social media and internet seems to be the perfect ecosystems where fake news and misinformation grow and spread. But the online dimension is not always enough to make the news viral or able to capture the people's attention. Most of the time, the so-called storytelling, the simplification of the narrative, especially with the use of hashtags, and also the strong emotional and persuasive connotation of the content make this news more diffused. And it does not matter how much users are smart or cultured. As Quattrociocchi and colleagues has demonstrated, these fake news feed on cognitive mechanisms such as confirmation bias and also cognitive dissonance. So in a work entitled Maschere Kierkegaardiane, I don't know if there's a translation for the English, but Amoroso writes that most people are not afraid of having a wrong opinion, but of having one correct. Yeah, probably now it is enough for him to open his Facebook or Twitter page to disagree with his own words, but internet has become the perfect place where people form their opinion. We go on internet to search information, to interact with other people, and to share our beliefs. So where traditional sites of time and space lose their value, the information and personal opinion became the only anchor point to the perception of self and the construction of personal choices. So the huge amount of information that internet provides accentuated a natural mechanism by which people select information based on their belief. And this, together with the development of algorithms able to segment users on their preferences, generates a particular phenomenon that now we call the echo chambers. Echo chambers is the most modern and powerful metaphor through which researchers identify a situation in which information, ideas, and belief are more likely to amplified and to reinforce it by the communication of, and interaction of like-minded people. I'm sorry. So if on one hand, the internet environment and the online environment allow us to access the most varied and areas of interest and meet people with diverse cultures and find a lot of information. On the other hand, it forces us to be selective. To describe this selective phenomenon, Constantine takes up a Negroponte concept of the daily me. Daily me is basically a daily newspaper customized on our belief and our preferences. And this, with the echo chamber, is studied by the authors as a risk induced by these technologies. So conversely, the authors propose and advocate a serendipity architectures that promotes unexpected news and diverse opinion and interaction with people who not necessarily think in the same way. But why talk with like-minded people or inquire through biased sources or live in an echo chamber should it be a problem? What worries is not the exclusion, because internet make us the possibility to find our place. What worries is not the inclusion, because we can find a group of interests, which kind of interests we have. But the real problems is the segregation. When people are divided into open subgroups, having conflicting and contrasting political positions, viewpoints, and goals, with only few individuals remaining neutral or holding an intermediate position, they are more likely to generate a particular phenomenon that is called the group polarization. Group polarization, as like fake news, has a very ancient history, widely studied in psychology, social, and behavioral science. So it is defined as the tendency for a member of a group to develop more extreme value judgments through the mutual reinforcement of similar and pre-existing beliefs. As happens in a famous work of Kierkegaard, where out translation does not give justice, the polarization provides a clear choices between two alternatives that paradoxically have reason to exist both. Think about Democrats and Republicans. Think about pro or cons vaccine or pro or cons gun control or something else. None of these choice is totally wrong or totally correct. But what's happened is that in a polarized contest, we reinforce our opinion. And also, polarization not only makes us more extreme, but make us less critical. Because in a polarized environment, we will tend to defend our opinion, even in front of the evidence, even in front of debunking, even if we are provided with scientific and legitimate arguments. So we will tend to bend information on what we want to see, what we want to believe, and what we want to hear. So our work is focused attention on this fascinating phenomenon. And we have chosen as a case study the 2016 presidential television debate between Hillary Clinton and the President Donald Trump. So our methodology can be used to analyze user-generated content when Twitter is used as a back-channeling platform. So basically as a medium in which people follow and discuss about another event that happens in another place, in another medium, or even live. The steps of our methodology are summarized in the figures, and so we start to collect data from Twitter, and then we extract two kinds of networks, and these networks are after analyzed to track the level of polarization. After, at the end, we use data mining techniques to understand which kind of variables or which combination of variables better explain this measurement. So we collect 300,000 tweets, and starting from these tweets, we identify an amount of 115 elite users. So basically, we filtering the account that is newspaper, political account, or journalist. So our criteria is more simple because it's the number of followers of this person. So then we manually classify this elite into groups, the Republican and Democrats. So we got a database with which we extract two networks. The first network is the retweet networks that basically is a social graph where nodes is this elite, and there's a connection between two nodes if there's an action of retweet. And also the keyword networks. This is based on the content of this tweet. In particular, we have the keywords that is node, and after there's a link between two keywords if they occurred in the same tweets. So to measure the polarization, we use a matrix developed by Mark Morales and colleagues. Of course, we are engineers, so we are more close to the physics. So we use this matrix because first, this metric recognizes the presence of opinion leader, and second, because the dipole metric is based on bipolar distribution, so it makes a real good fit with our case study in which voters decide one of the two major candidate sides. And after, because of course has been tested in other previously studies like ours, and it is based on an analogy of the electric dipole. So without going into detail, we can see some formulas and a schema, but the concept is that a population is perfectly polarized when it is segregated in two communities of the same size but opposing preferences. So we divided the data in bucket of 1 hour, and also, as you can see in the plot that is our results, we extract the top 5 positive and the top 5 negative words, and also the top 5 hashtags. So you can see how colorful is your language, and also, to be honest, some words is change rated because of strong content. So polarization, as you can see, increase on average over time. And also, as you can see in each debate, the polarization dynamics follow a new shape pattern where there is a temporary decline of the measure followed by an increase at the end of each debate. So this is the reason why we explain this temporary decline as just as a confrontation, a discussion between users, and not a revising of existing belief. So after measuring the polarization, as I said, we use a data mining techniques to identify its determinants. In particular, most of the existing words take things that the social networks measure, the homophily and like-minded people is the main factor that influence this phenomenon. Yet, we assumed that network topologies is not enough to explain the complexity of this phenomenon. So this is the reason why we built a model using 4 kinds of variables: the social network, the metrics about the traffic, conversational metrics, and sentiment. After that, for the data mining, oh, I'm sorry, that's our results, but the data mining, we use four type of algorithms, especially the decision tree, random forest, linear model, and neural nets. So we build a model to analyze all the combination of the four variables that I told before. So we obtained 15 combination of that. For 4 algorithms, we test and validated 16 models, and we evaluated that with the criterion of the minimization of the median square error. So in particular, our results show that group polarization is better explained by the semantic magic related to the content more than the structure of the social networks. Indicate and also, so I go to discussion. Okay. Our works have therefore highlighted 3 important results. The first one is the importance of the content that I say. The second, how has to affirm the presence of polarization in online discussion, and also to consider that not as a black box that separates the opinion, the measure of opinion before and after a discussion, or just before and after a laboratory treatment. Our temporal measure is able to monitor phenomenon in its continuity, highlighting the U-shaped pattern that we said before. And finally, the fact that people are open to discuss with non-like-minded people, but this is just a temporary effect of discussion, of the online discussion. In conclusion, what makes powerful Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and other media like that is not just their content, is the ability to deliver content. And this is the reason why researchers and designers about social media should pay great attention to the future offered by this social media. Because if, according to Matt Lone, the characteristics of the medium are going to dramatically influence the medium and the content, so we must ask ourselves how the medium we use shape the way in which we see the world, and how we can make the internet a better place. So maybe you have noticed that in my slides, there's 2 elements. The first one is the polarization of truth. The second one is the sculptures. So the message is that the extraordinary work done by artists such as Michelangelo or Donatello and other sculptures that are reported in this slide seems impossible even to imagine. Most of these work start from a single hard and compact material like marble. So it does not matter how hard and complex is the material that internet and social media are made of. As scientific community, we have a duty to rise to it and to take an action to understand and improve these tools, given their pervasiveness and their impact on people's life. So therefore, we must engage in these difficult tasks, as like these articles. We must try to make visible what I like to call the beauty of the internet. So thank you. And
we'll take some questions. Join us. I forgot to mention that the Simonetta is finishing her doctorate in engineering.
Please, any questions? Yes.
So I have a few comments. So to go off with your presentation, I think that's accurate in terms of what goes on now in public forums. And so a funny story, I was on Facebook and you talked about Republican versus like Democratic views. And I'm a Democratic person, but I am open to public forum in terms of any discourse that might happen, but in a respectful way. And I think on the internet, it's very hard to find someone to debate certain things without doing it respectfully and with credible sources and so forth. So it was about gun violence, and it was simply a picture, nothing else was said about it. And this person was just like, well, I don't know where you're getting your information from. My gun is my gun and all this other stuff. And so even they were like, okay, now look at this graph. And the graph had no credible source, nothing. It was just a simple, data. And I was like, okay, well, is this from an FBI source? Is there, some type of information from a credible source that's backing your claim? And it's funny because once I posted, the Uniform Crime Report or FBI statistics, the person just didn't comment anymore. And I think it's great placing ourselves in this filter bubble where it's, if we don't want to hear it, we don't want to see it, we could just easily delete your comment or mute, as I should say. So I think it goes back to also like the education and, not having this individualistic view and that's it. Like being open to other opinions and being able to discuss that.
And this is what's happened. And also there's a beautiful research made by Patrick and colleagues that I mentioned it before. And basically they prove that when people are in this, what they call the filter bubble, so in a group of like-minded people, what's happened is even when they talk in that the story that they are talking about is fake news, the people don't believe that. And also they amplify what they think. And this is strange because I agree with you, we need education about the critical reason, about the argumentative reasoning.
The one thing I found interesting about both of yours, but with yours was the showing how early fake news started happening. But one thing that came to mind when we were discussing that is tabloids. Like People Magazine, US Us Weekly. They've been around for decades now, and they are basically fake news in a magazine. They're reporting, different, the same celebrities are breaking up or getting back together each and every week, and each and every week those celebrities have to come out and be like, this is completely untrue. None of this is true. The only time I think one got something right was the Tiger Woods scandal, but that's, a whole separate issue of things. But what sparks my curiosity is like, why now are we, being so adamant about fake news, but no one really had a problem with tabloids? Everyone just knew whatever a tabloid is reporting, take it with a grain of salt or multiple grains of salt because more than likely it's fake. But now, because it's been almost assigned a name and it's become such a popular issue, everyone's up in arms about it. But then also at the same time, we're only looking at what's supposed to be a credible news source, and no one's calling out People Magazine for being, fake news in itself. So I was just wondering how has that kind of slid by the whole, crusade against fake news?
When a phenomenon like the polarization of opinion, but like all of social phenomenon, the causes is not just one. Is the entire contribution of these pieces. So what's happened is that on Facebook or even on Twitter or something like that, you have the possibility to find a lot of information. The problem is if you select just information that you think is right. So in this way, also with a link, I talked before with a journalist of their side that what's happened, I think that you try to find something on Amazon, and after, if you go on Facebook, you find all the advertising that say you that this is most like before your research, and so something like that. The algorithm, of course, it's the work of the algorithm, but also, and this is where we try to work, is our perspective. Because if you are able to introduce people in a discussion between people who not necessarily think in the same way. Of course, we are not sure that this placate the discussion, but of course it's a discussion. So I
Than it was before. That's changed. I think one of your questions was why is it an issue now and why wasn't it an issue before? Just because you have like viral propagation of social media. If companies like YouTube, WhatsApp, Facebook, they took it upon themselves to sort of tag, which is next to impossible, but they do have the resources to do it. So if they could do that privately source and not even like post those messages privately, that would help. So they have some sort of obligation as well, because they have the power to.
I have two comments.
Yes.
One is that the whole discussion of like credible sources, to me, this is the problem. And the only solution I've seen, besides the only I've seen so far, is Google's PageRank algorithm is an attempt to quantify credibility of sources. Fundamentally, it's what it really is, right? And I think the problem of credibility itself.
That's not entirely true. So PageRank has nothing to do. That doesn't have much to do with credibility.
It's a popularity contest.
So if you hire a search engine optimization company, they can propagate. They can make PageRank push up fake news as well.
But they can't push up against New York Times, for example, or credibility of huge primary sources online. Like and Google's aware of it, but the fundamental concept of it is that PageRank really is our only current method that we have for approximating.
So if you look at how PageRank works, it looks at the entire World Wide Web, right? So it's every few seconds web crawlers go out and they get all this information. So Google is saying search the entire web. Now if you subset that into a much smaller group of just credible news websites, what they would have on Google would be much less, of course, but more credible. So what you need is like search engines, not Google, maybe have a search engine specifically for news items, right? Which you can do now. Like there are tools like Apache, Notch, and Lucene, where you can write your own PageRank algorithm.
The tools and solve a problem that only humans can solve.
Yes.
That's the basic problem.
Yes, that is the basic problem. So it's not, someone has to say, well, this is good or this is bad. That is a problem.
So in light of all these problems and the obvious necessity for the Mark Zuckerberg to help solve it, how can we pressure Facebooks and Googles and the like to actually take some of these initiatives? What can we do to pressure them?
don't think it's a good strategy that, because this is their work. Their work is find money about the advertising and that. What we want to do is induce people who are critical about what they read. It's another point of view. You can pressure this company to make their work ethical because it's company. Or maybe I think so.
Now Facebook is in trouble because of all that they knew about all the fake advertising and the Russians. So I think they're looking into that.
So yeah, I think I know in India there's some news stories, Facebook documents, and the government raises a concern about it. I think we really need to have very focused community user groups which can convince either government or Facebook itself that take it off right now. But again, that's a can of worms, right? So you may have people who are too right wing, left wing, and then so it's not that easy.
Okay, like all good things have come to an end. And we have lunchtime, we'll have a lunch break, and today being Saturday, you all have classes, so our dining place will be on Goris. Other cafeterias are not open today. because there are no students on campus. So we'll go to Monaco. So we'll come back here at 2:30 to begin on time for our session. Okay? Thank you.
I have like me class. The thing is like, no.
Thank you.
I don't know, like,
Sorry.
Fine, thank you. You speak well.
According to their
You know, like, when I get like 7 means like speech, like 1 means like like, no, 1 means like
All right.
speech.
We have a decision to make outside.
We have a decision. Oh, the lady, yeah.
Really?
Oh. Yeah, bro, so look at Yeah, I'll come back. I'll get back to the. Oh, you're here?
No,